만남가다냐 베심전 탐제 라만 도제 드베 골라 서로한데 소 벽에 얌나 되그래 되네 다 잡지 두고 어제는 뭐 책에 가려송 난가 요래 셀라브나 되네 최세야테 냠는 집에 값소 최세야테 고대보 냠소양 렌데보 되네 냠소 렌베 값라 되네 최게 nenga te hiene ngarang ke sem tang higa tang la jurban roto ba chik chongna tene ne to roba se 담배 추억이 ne to ro se tene sunggo yores.
Kyabje Tuku Urgyen Rinpoche said that when it comes to Dharma practice, if there is a way of practicing that is easy to understand and easy to apply, such that it really transforms our mind and our character, then this is when the Dharma has really struck the point. That's when it really hits the point for us.
Tene nyingma pa ga nang la Java long chenpa songyate tene chuege nyamnen la puldu chongwa chigre gajubi ga nangla tene gambo pa songyate tene tokba tang puldu chongwa chigre kong namba nika ke dama rabade karere songna tangbo sem ham lo chuso rowa se In
the Nyingma tradition, the excellent teachings have come down from the great master Longchenpa. In the Kagyu tradition, we have great teachings that have come down from the great master Gampopa. And these teachings involve a pith instruction that is taught by both of them. The first key point of that pith instruction is that we need our mind to turn towards the Dharma.
Ta tambo sem seyade taranganzo ki tujundu samlo tangne sem nala namdo sharia tang chiki rang so ke semne chik lega kari la gagdu chea la kari do sem ji namjun ji samlo tang be kabla tene dang ngarang la tene samba je do dang semjin shen la phemba samba je do dang tate namjun ki samlo te tang dang te la taung de te la sem se lo soare.
So first, when we talk about our mind, what that refers to is our ordinary thinking, just our own mind, our ordinary mind. What does it do? Right? Our mind and our thoughts. So our mind which thinks about ourself, our mind which relates to sentient beings, to other beings, just that kind of ordinary process of thinking. If we check, what is that like? That is the mind.
Tene chuso roba songyate tene chu songyate tangbo migiwege lega shen la yang pemba meba rang la yang pemba mebege lega tene tarba toibege chu te garesana tene zimba rabo te shenba rabo te tos ma chung ro ya ke tab shenba de zimba yonyinga mendo samba rabo je zimba je yoyana yang zimba de kande jindu gawado sambe hakko to ba je tarba se tamji chembe chu se ya te ngarang jangba mayimba semjente 탐제 찍바 찍장 전에 나랑게 낭미 세베게 짐바 첨보추 타니보냐 샘진 셴세네 타릉불 근데 마치바 전에 예링잔에 메바 탐제 찬냠바 직sem딩 되네 잉 되네 탐 찍바 찬냠 직 샤르톰나 로라 데네 탐지 침비케 고방 토브레 치비케 탑라나메바 장집 제셈렘보체 송추세야텔라 데네 사당 미추 타르바당 타르비추 탐지 침비 고방 토브레 치비 추송 추라 숨요르와 데네 로 추소로 세베캅소 데네 레메게와 상인가 멘도 삼바데 로라 샤나 데네 당보 추 고조와레 다 짐바데 총으로 로고고 도나 삼바 총나 데 타르바키 추데 고조와레 어테네 제네 데네 나랑 라츠 로라 따네 로야데 베네 쳔보레도 송와레 데데 로 추소 로 송웨게 추테라 데네 라미기 추 타르바키 추 탐지 침베 고방토브레 치비 추 딜로 추소 로와서
When we speak about our mind turning towards the Dharma, if we begin by having this thought, oh, I shouldn't engage in non-virtuous actions because they don't help anyone else and they don't help me either. They're not beneficial for either one of us. That's kind of the first step in our mind turning towards the Dharma. Then there's the Dharma that leads to liberation, which is the practice of letting go of attachment and grasping, a reduction in our attachment and grasping. And so whenever we are able to let go of that kind of clinging, we're practicing the Dharma of liberation that leads to liberation. And then there's the Dharma practice connected with omniscience. And this is when we don't think only of ourselves, but actually we regard ourselves and all sentient beings as being truly equal. When we really don't regard other sentient beings as somehow different. And when we, for example, don't hold on closely to my family and those who are close to me, and then disregard all other sentient beings, thinking of them as somehow different or other. When we're free from that kind of closeness, that kind of distance of close nearness and being far away, when we're free from that kind of attitude, when we genuinely regard all sentient beings as equal, and we really feel that way from the core of our heart, if we become able to do that, then this is the unsurpassed method for the attainment of the state of omniscience, which is the practice of bodhicitta. That is that unsurpassed method. So again, when we talk about our mind turning towards the Dharma we can say falls into three categories. The Dharma, which is the practice that leads to rebirth in the states of gods and humans. The Dharma, which leads to liberation. And the Dharma, which leads to the state of omniscience. We can say that there are three aspects of Dharma practice here when we talk about our mind turning towards the Dharma. And the first one is to think to ourselves, okay, it's not good to engage in negative karmas, negative actions. That's the first step of practicing the Dharma, or turning the mind towards the Dharma. Turning our mind towards the Dharma that leads to liberation starts when we think, okay, I need to let go of my attachments. And then when we really check and examine our mind and think that we want this not just for ourselves but for all sentient beings, then, and we don't regard ourselves as somehow different from all sentient beings, then we're taking up the path of the practice of Dharma that leads to the state of omniscience. So when we talk about our mind turning towards the Dharma can be understood in each of these three different ways.
Then, church se 당보 로 추수 들어와 church 백값소 나랑 그 냠뇽뇽뇽 직 셰바이나 망보도 요 말에 나랑 그 셈라 추 두준도 마제바체네 튼 땅배 냠뇽 제백값들에 두준도 또스또 추 나랑 셈네 간데도 따여데 뺏내 첨보래 강인사나 저런 게 셰럽 셈르와 짱보더부지요 셰럽 뒤에서 요나 되네 차바셰 그래 미팅 고고르당 나랑 고고르당 미셴발랑 고고르당 전에 미 셰럽 진데 이제 셰럽데 초르송나 고고르당 그래 차바셰 되네 요래 되네 양 셰럽 맹에다이나 then tom jensa ne kaya go mesu ne ngarang tanaya tamesin shenaya shemesin tom jensa do kore denje ge wangdo marowa jene sherab yoba je la yang sherab pa nyemba ge lamla chor marowa che sherab de me sona sherab ji de tabla chome burju dabo tong jambe yang ge songa dangju tong sonam ge cho sang ne molam jamne sherab topre sho sembe molam sherab ju le jebra sho sembe molam jabate ne chembore de kayen sana ngarang ge sem ge chu hakko matubna ngarang ge sem ta matubna 추긴 고데 쪽토고 말해 당에 단다 추세야 돼 가리 라고 요래서나 냠네 지에네 심주 도르네 때네 셈데 또서 로보체 셈데 기부차 셈데 장보차나 디셈 로보차 상보차 기부차에게 셈데 기미티게 냠네 출루셔바지 당아 내도 해바지 로나 셈쟁오 동반이게 똑토 그러와 당 나랑 그 셈데 나랑 그 약보치네 통미투 ngomme시 따메싱게 미티게 때네 같이 남아 람나야 그 셈쟁오 동니 똑토고 말와 된제 임비 중산라 때네 셔럽 직구구요래 양양 셔럽디 왕 독자 직 초송아 많이 봐 나랑 그다 냠용래 나랑 셔럽 또서 쟁도 뒤인도 가리 쟁도 세나 나랑 고고땅 미신발랑 고고땅 쇼로제 땅땅 내려래로 뒤인도 가서 장보연나야 약보 말해 장보 된 고고땅 그래 뒤는 고고땅 얘기 말해 상보지 장보제나 랑신게 대 쳐봐 약보 차 그래 최 상보다 장보 맞잖아 시랍 여바지 가야 배그 말해 뒤인도 가서 때 나랑 그다 냠용 지내 쉬와 인생
When we talk about first turning our mind towards the Dharma, I can tell you a little bit about this from my own personal experience. Not that I have a lot of experience, but I do always take care in meditation sessions and outside of them as well to really practice looking at my own mind. And this is really important because honestly speaking, if you're somebody who's a little bit smart, you have to be careful because you can end up fooling yourself and you can end up fooling other people too. If you're smart, it's not necessarily a good thing because you end up doing things that fool yourself and others. And if you're not smart, then you end up in that state of just being kind of dull and confused and not aware, and you can't really check what's going on with your mind either. And so if you don't have that kind of intelligence, then there are methods that you can use to gain intelligence, like for example, offering butter lamps, making prayers to Manjushri, doing the practice of Manjushri, even making prayers and aspirations to be more intelligent. And it's very beneficial and important to do those things. Because of course, if we don't know our own mind, if we don't see our own mind, how could we possibly enter into the gateway of Dharma practice and start practicing the Dharma? The more we practice, we become more and more tame, our mind becomes more at ease, our mind becomes more happy, and someone who has that kind of mind is able to practice the Dharma in a genuine way. And then the pith instructions are really able to hit the vital point. They're able to really practice in an authentic way. And then when they receive instructions on the nature of mind, on emptiness, they're able to actually recognize that and apply that in practice. If we don't know our own mind, if we're not even aware of what's going on in our own mind, then it doesn't matter how many pith instructions we receive. We're just not going to be able to come to that kind of recognition. So knowing our mind is very important. In order to do that, we need to have wisdom. We need to be intelligent. But again, if that wisdom goes off course, that's a problem. It's not just enough to have wisdom, right? It's not, or to be intelligent rather. It's my own personal experience, right? I think that I'm somewhat of an intelligent person. And because of that intelligence, I have fooled myself sometimes. And I've gotten close to the point of actually fooling other people too. So it's not that being smart is just in and of itself good. It's really, really important that we don't let that intelligence go off course. So that means that we have to be very good and we have to be very honest. We have to be really honest with ourselves and be very good, because then when we practice the Dharma, it can be real Dharma practice. Otherwise, we're not practicing authentically. So just being smart in and of itself isn't really enough. That's my own experience.
네, 다 된다. 독도라고대 나랑 수 샘당 시가당 쩨바데 나랑 그 통투부 그래서 다저 드리다. 로추스로 그래 제발라 되네 결혼 추 제네 마시는 딱지 땅 거래. 저런 게 샘라 딱지 땅 냠낸 제백가 추 제백가서 되네 샘라 간제도 샘게 감달 간제도 추 마시백가라 샘라 간제도 감라 간제도 저런 게 딱지 땅당 추 제나 팬도 여바데 저런 냠용게 땡네 되네 샤르톱나 로라 샤르톱 뇽톱나 되네 저런 게 냠낸 제야라 가두이나 요구 말해 미치기 기규기 대고고 말해 저런 딱다 튼땅 저런 제도 그래 다 대냠용지 함하거나 되네 따네 다 제고 그래다 스팀 서샤와 나신레 마도 랑신 로라 슈기 되네 게토고 말해 대신에다 저런 딱제 땅 세지 빼내신 보래 대나양 미창마 그 딱제 때 땅에 신그 말해 땅 되네 톱게면도 근데 얘도 까불라 아니 팀 잡으지 쇠네 니마다와 튼 빵고 그래 세네 까 땅샤나 마도 다 답시메라 와
The key point here is it's really important for us to be able to see our own mind, to see our own character, and to see our own conduct. We have to be able to do that if we really want our mind to turn towards the Dharma, which means that we have to check our own mind. We really have to investigate and examine our own mind. So, what is my mind like when I'm doing Dharma practice? What is my character like when I'm doing Dharma practice? And what about when I'm not? What is my mind like when I'm not practicing the Dharma? What am I like when I'm not practicing? If you check, you will have some experience, and that will lead you to really be able to practice the Dharma, and you will practice the Dharma if you really check in that way. And you won't have to rely upon the disciplinarian coming and saying, now you sit down and do a session, now is time, you have to. You'll just do it yourself. And when you don't have that kind of experience of really checking what your mind is like when you practice and when you don't, then practice happens only because you feel like, oh, there's a rule, I have to do it, and I'm afraid if I don't follow the rule, then something will happen. You won't be able to practice out of your own strength of experience. There won't be this inner strength pushing you to practice on your own. And if you really just check yourself, you see how important it is in this way to really investigate and examine yourself. But not everybody's able to do that, so that's why we end up with rules, right? You have to do your daily practice session, and that's just how it is.
lo chusu rawa song jabje tugu ujin rabu cheke lo chusu rawa de chebala lo do namba shite nyam so lengu gu yore songare.
So this is about turning our mind towards the Dharma. Kyabje Tuku Urgent Rinpoche said that the process of turning our mind towards the Dharma involves contemplating the 4 mind changings.
Den tanjur nyeba kawa che medakpa lejunde kurube nimik songadres.
And this is the rareness or difficulty of obtaining a precious human birth, the fact that our life is impermanent, the fact of karmic cause and effect, the unfailing nature of karmic cause and effect, and the defects of samsara.
Chö lamdo dovara chebala, tene kari gugure sana, zo dabade nyingje dong changjuji semye de re. Chö de lamdo dovara chebala, ta pena chorong ke jabro domba shu, changjuji sem dom shu, tene songa rabo, ceng nga rabo, rang gom rabo jab, kari inayang, chö di lam la drogugu yo na, lam de kari jere sana hingje de re. Hingje se de me channe zong te, tene chö njikten niga ne pungchare sana dukjare. Michi mila chöba yenada, chöba menada sokbo chöbi namsa shiye na yemena. Semdela sangbo jik mena, de ngone tane mi dukjare. Raba, tako chöba ji yena yang sangbo mena, ko mi dukjare. De yendo kapso chö njikten kari tona yang hingje seya de kandichere sana nganzu namjune shegerwa rangi lula pelongla shenla nepa machi chis nganzu demba dengerwa o tenna shin chene samlo khande tango gore selaba yena tene penna ngarang chung kabla tene jabje tugu jenrum bache sala char sam yabjerum bache char samje chujini marum char chedu pesha nangrwa pesha nga chung kabla te nga chung kabla pesha pe gaburwa tene rodo poborum bache sala rodo tene pesha na yab sala rodo yang pesha na aguzala rodo pesha na tede che kadu na pesha ra grwa tenga pesha ke number de song sing mare de semjen de singre ta go se langchen de go se siru mo go se shawa mo go se la de langchen se dong da je grwa ta se de ngab ja ra ko te ta semjen de ta nga go gra o te ri jin de ne chung ga ne ta pesha de de ga ge yo de ngarang ha go yo de tingsan pugu de zo na ya nga za le on de lamsang ko mo ngab ja da jik dong da de ge lamsang pugu zo la 가인에서 그까라 콘소게 셈된 나라 나 나신 게 오탈라마 제가 도이야 람상 베샤테 독슬람네 제 가능도 뭐지 지그래 삼네 나랑 충충 간데 서로와는 간데 종요나야 tinnangshin jik sonnang jik mi shenpa jik la tena tini tinnangshin ke ngarang la kaju sadu mena mi shenpa la kaju tang na yang cho mendo wa ngarang ke chala di kuma shor na kale do wa di yendu ngarang kuma jaya yo mara wa o tene chene samlo tang ne tene kani tene chok tamje ne tene ngarang la tatang ngarang ke chok tamje le tatang jik yuwa tang na tene sem de la to jik sem de jashenpo chane ya ta 약보제다 제고고도 야 약보제다 제고사래서 인제 맞잖아요 약보다 제고사래 삼발로 샤그려 갖고 인제 제세에 내라고 요 말하다 즉 간수 내라보다고 통고도 와디 각고래도 인제 당보제 다 인제 맞잖아요 당보 나랑라 두부디 산드메나 미셴발 두부 트레이닝 말에 삼바디 초로바디 렘나 티 칼리 데니 데네 인제 티기래 삼거든
In order for our Dharma practice to become the path, what do we need? We need love and compassion and bodhicitta. So this is how our Dharma becomes the path. So for example, let's say you've taken the refuge vows and you've taken bodhisattva vows and you're reciting some mantra and you're doing some meditation. When we talk about the practice or the process of the Dharma becoming the path, what the path actually is compassion. And so without compassion, whether we're talking about the context of the Dharma or even just a worldly context, you'll never be successful. You'll always fail without compassion. So if someone is a Dharma practitioner or not, right, whether they're wearing the Dharma practitioner's robes or not, if that person doesn't have a kind mind, then they're not a good person, whether it's a worldly person or a Dharma person, right? We need to have this kind of kindness and compassion in order to be a good person. Like for example, I remember sometimes when I was really young, I would go see my grandfather, Kyabje Tukor Rinpoche, sometimes, or my father, or my uncle, Chukuni Rinpoche, and I really liked money. And I knew that if I would go see them, then they would usually give me some money. So I would go to see my grandfather, Tukor Rinpoche. I think like, oh, he's going to give me some money, so this will be great. Since I was really young, I liked it. Or like, oh, I'll go see my father, Rinpoche. I'll go see my uncle, Rinpoche, because they'll give me money. But when I was that young, I didn't know the numbers, actually, so on the bills. But I knew the animals, so I could recognize, oh, there's a tiger on here, there's an elephant, or there's a deer. So I would say, I prefer the tiger or the elephant, but not the deer, no thank you, because the elephant is 1,000 rupees, right? And then the tiger was 500. So even when I was really young, I liked that, and then I would always want to go see them so that I could receive money. And so these days when kids come to see me, I always give them some money. I give them 500 rupees, right? I give them some money because I know from my own experience that they probably are just like me. They think, oh, it'll be really nice to go see the Lama because if I go see him, then I'll get some money, right? And so based on my own personal experience, then I can turn that around and think about what other people's experience is like and do things that are helpful to them. So for example, I don't like it when people scold me, so I shouldn't scold other people. I don't like it if people steal from me, so I better not steal from other people, right? If we just check actually from all sides and we take our own personal experience and we just turn that around, then that allows us to have a kind of more open, a more broad attitude and mindset. And then that really shows us how important it is to do things that are good, to be good. Even if we don't have real compassion, right? Even without real compassion, we see how important it is to begin by just being a good person. And honestly speaking, compassion, real compassion, it's not easy. We think, oh, it's easy to generate compassion. It's actually not. It's not easy at first, it's difficult, right? But we can begin by thinking, well, I don't want to experience things that are uncomfortable or painful. I don't want to suffer. And other people are actually just the same as me. And when we slowly start to extend that understanding towards other people of what we ourselves like to experience, gradually, slowly, we can begin to develop real compassion.
Do things in Jarbu Nangla Libu Tangbo de do things in Jarbu te Tangazo Gomjik Jamne Tane Tazokwa Chembo than Chacha Chembo Seni Yorba the Indu Kapsu Tenet Chacha Chembo Rabajina Chembo se Naga Chacha Chembo and Himbu Chacha Chembo and Sumiore Take a Kung Rabajik Tugna Dogi Chacha Chembo te Kung Rabote do things in Jarboche Tenju Ganala Julama Tenju Nesuche Tene Naga Chacha Chembo te Tene Demchog Judravo Tang, Tene Churu Tang, Pamo Tang, Tenzo Traveredua, Himbucha Chempo Dena, Tene Jagaraki Trupchen de Zoka Toha, or Tohake, Shung the Zola Puktune, Tenyamne Chego Yosare. Tende Yendu, Ta, do things in Jarbote, Chaja Chembo, Yamne Chebekabla, Neka Chembo Yendu, not do things in Jarbo Mamboloy. Tende lobe kapso do things in Jarbo liu tangbo nangla kante song yore song na sangje ke semjen thamje la nyamba song are semjen thamje la nyambe kongcho zane me pa semje la semjen thamje nyamba ji yula yo na tene di chu ji ke tingin zin yula ji gre song are tende chine jin ji yu ji yo song ne liu tangbo nang tende song ne tene ngaranena yang shoge tun tawbe kapso yang tene semjen thamje manyamba mepa nyamba tene khongro ge dingne sem nakbo sem kaya le tang ne pang ne nga la ya ko che ma song sabe ke lo de changma yuk ne tene ningje ji ju la hang jie de tene semjen tham Nyambadele Shuzu Chega, the Deon, the Sembade Pa, Lobo Chane, Zimbabwe, Medu, Lobo Chando, the Lobo Chando, Galatene Gum, Yamne Kari, Jenaya, Che Debuji, or Rea, that they do Sanji song and do things in Jarbuna, and the song yore. Attend into Chenambake, Lo Chusun Rovare, Chulam to Robert Chebala, Yingji de Nechembo, Yingji de Jula Geo Sardu, Tene, Chanju just simply Jula Jebra Chebala. Then get devoted to your Ata the Ninja the Maji Pardo Chanju Semji Jula Che Togmare, the Ninja the Pechembore song. Did you know that Tene, Yadawa Trawake, Uma Jubuji Kabla, Tene Chebra Jibi Kapso, Tene Sangjela Chebra Jabayam met. Chanju Sembala Chebra Jabayam met. Sulu Chebra Jabaresana, Ninja Chebra Jabare. Kain Sana. 상지 고방 토브르 제발라 장주 셈바 인고고요래 장주 셈바 차야라 장주제 셈제고요래 장주제 셈로 제발라 제발라 닝제 마제가 바로도 장주 셈 메레 근데 닝제 때 되네 당보 최제베 갑라야 닝제 내 첨보 바로도야 닝제 내 첨보 타말라야 닝제 내 첨보 인소네 오만 주비지 갑라 안에 다와 차고 그 닝제를 쳐버려 줘봐 당 임전나 때네 당가서 닝지 검주도 내침보레스
In the Samadhi Raja Sutra, in the very first chapter, there's a statement, an important statement. So when we talk about practicing meditation, there are these two traditions, the tradition of practicing the great perfection and the tradition of practicing Mahamudra, right? And so Mahamudra also, we can say, has three different types. There's Sutra Mahamudra, there's Tantric Mahamudra, and Essence Mahamudra, these three. And when it comes to the scriptural sources for these, the scriptural source for Sutra Mahamudra is the Samadhi Raja Sutra. In terms of commentarial sources, the Uttara Tantra Shastra is an important commentarial source. When it comes to Tantra Mahamudra, then there are tantras like Chakrashamvara, like the Vajravarahi, and so on. And then when it comes to Essence Mahamudra, there are the songs of realization from the great Indian Mahasiddhas, great accomplished masters. So that serves as a scriptural source for Essence Mahamudra. And so if we want to train in the practice of these, when it comes to the practice of Mahamudra, actually the Samadhi Raja Sutra is a really important source for Mahamudra practice. And for that reason, I read that sutra quite a lot. And in the first chapter of that sutra, there's a statement that mentions we need to regard all sentient beings equally with a mind that is utterly free from any kind of anger. And if we have that kind of mind free from any anger, wherein we regard all sentient beings equally, then this is a cause for samadhi, for meditation to arise within our experience. It's like one cause or condition for samadhi. And since it's mentioned like that in the sutra, when I do my own personal practice in the mornings, I begin by really regarding all sentient beings as being equal. Just letting go of any kind of anger or kind of dark attitude present in my mind. I just let go all of that. Even the idea of like, oh, I'm not doing a good job, all of that. I just let go of all of those kind of attitudes. And then remain in a state that creates a space for compassion to arise. And I spend about half an hour like that, really just reflecting on letting go and into the understanding of the equality of all sentient beings. And when I do that, my mind becomes very relaxed and very much at ease. And then when the mind is like that, when the mind is relaxed and at ease, then when we move on to do meditation, any kind of meditation arises very easily. So this is what is mentioned by the Buddha in the Samadhi Raja Sutra, and it's really beneficial actually. So when we talk about turning our mind towards the Dharma and then moving on to make the Dharma our path, we can't make the Dharma our path without compassion. Compassion is so, so important. And it's important because when we give rise to compassion, it becomes all that much easier to give rise to bodhicitta. You actually can't generate bodhicitta until you really have authentic compassion. So compassion is extremely important. This is why in the Madhyamaka Avatara, entering the middle way, Chandrakirti in the opening homage, he doesn't pay homage to the Buddha, and he doesn't pay homage to the Bodhisattvas. Who does he pay homage to? He begins by paying homage to compassion. And why is that? It's because all of us want to attain the state of Buddhahood. But in order to attain the state of Buddhahood, we first need bodhisattvas to be a bodhisattva. To be a bodhisattva, you need bodhicitta. But without compassion, it's not possible even to give rise to bodhicitta. So first, at the very beginning, he praises, actually, pays homage to bodhicitta. So this is extremely important, actually, when we are practicing the Dharma. At the very beginning, when we first start practicing the Dharma, compassion is important. In the middle, as we move onward in our journey of Dharma practice, compassion continues to be important. And at the end, likewise, compassion remains important. And for this reason, then, in the Madhyamaka Avatara, entering the middle way, Chandrakirti begins the treatise by praising compassion. Compassion is so important.
다 hinji들로 숨이와래. 냠내시 당대. 랑기 ngoone, ngarangi ngoone, ingje 냠내시 당 직. 랑신 이라 뚜비 냠내시 당 직. 신라 짱바 때베 냠내시 당 숨도. 다 ngarangi ngoone, ingje 냠내시 베 까블라 간디치 고고레 세나. 미 chik la pen thoya ke tabla ngarang sok lo tang na yang tang thuk gre sambe lo tha che thoba che ke tingji de jula che thugo ko yore son sedu kabla ngarang ge ngone nga sheba ge zimba de bette ko nen가 첨부 ጸ네 매바지 레토고 군도와 딱 나랑 오네 티레 닝지 줄레 집에 탑제네 지셔비 리부테 나랑 오네 된데 인사래 어떤데 참참 롤로 샤그레다 다 나다 내가 면도 삼 샤그레 자샤자샤 야 요런 거 내게 면도 같아 마도 이 샤그레 돼 샤그도 직티레 이바데 랑다 신이가 디 냠는 제당데 간데레서나 코과 첨보 생감 코과 첨보 맨날 주주님을 뭐지 간데도 코과 첨보 참삼라다 this is 공부 숨담도 엉거려 봐 얘는 백 코과 첨보 맨매세 코과 첨보 전에 백 쇠바 첨보도 와 어떤 당시 전에 안조양 랑신이가라 펜바테 코과 첨보 제주도 직 니바테 주템보 되는 뭐지 송어도 왔다기 가서 전종게 되네 가서 가르쳐 버렸다 진다 콩로 독주 눈주스 내게 깨자래도 와 단도형 되네 뭐지 다 도대체 송 가다요 대도형 그 전반 마진이 나야테 그 주템보 신의 슝심네 그 미랍네 슝심네 대 주야테 랑신이가라 펜베게 닝지나야 팽가 말에 코과 첨보 슝템보 유템보 슝상보스 된도 내가 첨보를 마도 그배 닝지 열때 일단 밑에 특들지래 람상 폭초초 독초초 열에서는 되게 말해 근데 랑신이가라 펜바테 코과 첨보 슝템보 신송아 어디래 랑신이가라 때문에 닝지대 신라 때문에 닝지대 간다고 그래서나 신라 때문에 닝지대 당보 가래 상지 그 송열에 대가 나신지 구루를 붙이고 송하래 간데 송열에서 람르 미신하고 나와 송열 당보 진바리 진세 다랑 가서 긴든 봐서도 레제 봐서도 미스 럼부치게 내 시그네처나 럼부치 추님을 쓰다 근데 시그네 람상 찍는 파슈 파데 장 송도 와 가서는 통계면도 와 어서치 그 믹들 찍 믹시컨데 봐서라 제ren도 와 근데 많이 봐 람상 따와다 찍 가르치고도 강한 제고도 삼아 람상 고들 색도바데 통토바데 진바르 진세 상지 당보도 송도 와 당보 직제 송도 와 디 심진 신을 땜비게 형제들의 연바람 화사 대고 임베 슈그로나서 제 게모겐 대고 임베 맞대 라는 되게 말아 그 게모 게지 된 연반 녀마스 전춘세 코랑 당라 펜바 코랑 그 고토바지 랍자 잡스 추를 주스 던주스 저런 랍자 칸디 잡 코랑 칸디 시에나요 딘나랑 딘나시 그 냠내 제스 디 랑깅 모는 형제 냠내 세당 직 랑신 이가라 때는 냠내 세당 직 신라 때베 냠내 세당 직 닝제도 줄라 제바 직 팽거 말하다 라글렌 따르신 거로 와 베나 로변 겐드마조 다 다나 진짜 로구 로정체 되네 조변차 되네 조변차 로변차 되네 로변 야고 전에 되네 켄준 상솜 제도 되네 켄보게 칭아소 전에 펴드가라 다 같이je 송로나라도 저는 시에메시나 그래서 칸네 시에마시는데 로 먹고 장안에 펜도 메려봐 그 장데 가르에서 그 치좀 숨시는 마 시에셴고 그래 대세 잡으신 거 그래 저와트도 렌 잡으신 거를 마도 빼자 먹었다네 시에메신 저와트도 찍봐서 돈만 먹고 때 대가상에 랍사이 봐 슬람나 되네 초참면도 되래 나 아버지나 음식 가도라 찍봐인지래 저와라 차 처음에 받으래 먹고 되그래다 차다 초 야다 요 가야메 받으와 먹고 되그래 돼 코란 내가 쳔버려 와 알아다 제가 국박국장을 해야 돼 코란라 빼내가 쳔보인도 딱 찍고 깔래 잠내 대세 자고요 지 제발 따나다 건조섬 달로에 최시에 제바들이 되기도 롱아 잘라야 최시에 제바대가 되기도 강 펜도면도 삼바들이 레레 손라 로라 샤기도 때 내가 양그 형제세야 돼 미신경 오원이 따고도 때 코랑라 내가 첨부지레도 여러봐 어떤데 인상 다디 나랑 냠뇽당 장네 다디 닝지게 당한테 대인세 this 망보래서
There are 3 different ways that we can train in compassion. From our own side, in a way that's related both to ourselves and others, and in a way that focuses primarily on others. So how can we train in compassion in these ways? The first type of compassion, which really relates just to me, is we need to really give rise to compassion until we're able to really feel, okay, in order to help one person, I would be able to give up my own life. I could give my life to help one person, completely and totally give up all concern for ourselves. So this is training, that is the result that can come from training in compassion in terms like from our own side, relating to ourselves. And honestly speaking, sometimes that feeling does come up. I know it's come up, 100% it comes up for us. It doesn't last very long, but we do feel that sometimes, right? So this is compassion, training in compassion here from in terms of ourself from that perspective. And the next training is compassion that relates both to oneself and others. And so this is having a really kind of open attitude, being really not angry, extremely patient, right? Extremely patient. That kind of attitude is beneficial or is related to training in compassion both from one's own side and the side of others. And so also to have this kind of long framework for things. Like, you know, this gentleman who came here today, the Sikkimese gentleman, the sponsor who's cared for Rinpoche's family, that was 60 or 70 years ago. 60 or 70 years ago. Rinpoche still says, thank you, please come, sit. He invited, he offered a kata. He didn't forget the kindness that was given to him, showed to him such a long time ago. He wants to maintain that relationship for generations, even in the continuing future generations. So this is really important, actually, to be extremely patient and have this kind of long framework or perspective of long framework when it comes to compassion. And then this is another point here. This is something that the Buddha said and Guru Rinpoche also said. Later, we find it also taught in the Lamrim Yeshe Ningpo. It mentions that we need to start by being generous. By being generous, right? And watch Chukanim Rinpoche, you see how he does this. Somebody walks in the room and immediately he's like, find them a seat, give them something, what do they need, right? We don't even see anything. We're sitting there just like totally, it's almost like we're wearing these like black sunglasses and we can't see anything at all. And Rinpoche is immediately like, oh, go over there and find that person and make a seat for them and give them something. Immediately, he sees them all and he's always giving something. This is what the Buddha taught. He said we have to be generous. This is how we help sentient beings. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we need to say kind things to them, like with this smile on your face, right? How are you? Not like, how are you? How are you? How are you? With a smile, this kind of kind, smiling face. And the third thing then is to actually give advice that will help that specific person. See what is helpful and beneficial to them and give them advice. Tell them something that's beneficial. And the fourth is the advice that you've given to them, you have to follow it yourself. So this is also extremely important. This is what the Buddha taught us and Guru Rinpoche also. This is a way of actually practicing and training in compassion with reference both to oneself and to others. And it's really important actually that we give rise to bodhicitta, that we give rise to compassion in our own mind stream. It's important to give rise to compassion, but it's not enough to just have this idea, oh, I have compassion in my mind. We have to actually act on it. We have to do compassionate things. Like those of you who are studying in the Shedra, it takes 9 years of study, right, before you become a Lopan. First you become a Kyurpan, you get to do a review class, and then you become a Lopan when you graduate from Shedra. And then through upholding the qualities of learnedness and discipline and kindness, eventually you perhaps get put in the position of being called a Kempo. You're enthroned as, you're given the position of a Kempo. And then someone comes up to you and they say, now please teach the Dharma. And then you sit on the throne and you're just like I can't say anything. That's a problem. The whole point of studying is that you need to be able to teach, and you need to be able to compose, and you need to be able to debate. You have to be able to do that in order to benefit others. That's so important. That's the whole point of studying. Otherwise, why did you study for so many years, right? If somebody comes up and asks you a question, and you say, I already said that, why are you saying that? And you get really angry, and you reply them in such a nasty way. What's the point, right? People come ask questions. It happens to me all the time. I think Gata Umse Tenzin Sangbo also probably has a similar experience. People ask all kinds of questions. Really, questions that from my perspective seem a little strange, seem a little bit of pointless, right? But I have to remember, for that person, it's extremely important. That's why they're asking that question. And so it's really important. And then I put forth effort and energy in answering the question to the best of my ability. If someone comes and asks a question, and then you just say like, this year I gave this teaching, and then like 5 years later you're asking the same question, like even if you feel that, you can't say that. You have to really give rise to this sense of compassion, really consider things from another person's side. And that question for that person is something that's really important to them in that moment for their experience. And so give rise to a real sense of compassion and do your best to actually give them what it is that they're asking for and they need. So from my experience, these things are really important when it comes to cultivating compassion.
Nyamdu nada, kakache nada, dorje semba gomde, mender, tene, laminanjor, guru yoga. Tishi de hundru bumshite, cho lamdu doverchibeke, nyamne yensong.
When it comes to the practice of bringing our Dharma practice onto the path, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche explained that this is a reference to the practice of the 4 times 100,000 accumulations of the Ngundo, the preliminary practices. So that's refuge and bodhicitta, which in some Ngundo practices are combined, and in some contexts they're separated out into 2 separate practices. Then the practice of Vajrasattva, the practice of offering the mandala, and the practice of Guru Yoga. Doing these practices of the Ngundo, the preliminary practices, this is what is meant by the practice of letting our Dharma practice become the path.
Lam tulba seva songarwa. Ta lam tulba seva se te karere sana ta ngarangi chu ngoro bomshi chenadra gom nyamnen chegi yonadra. Ta tulba senge te karere ngoshingorwa. 당부 출발 셀에서도 셀 고거래 가리 셀 고거 여바데 하 막거나 되네 셀메시래 텔라 출발텔라 시요 송아래 시데 간데세나 당부 출발텔라 시가 네발레켈라 바니 세거도와 ngazukel라 시가 세로와 미게 곰시데 시가 야보셔라 메네 얘도 요래 시가도 당부래 시가 독자 시가 냠바 tene to tung yuju chabo lamna ya menyenge je lamna mechenge tene tuk jenkhe tene rik jindu wa shiga ota tere shiga kencha jore chik labdu kap so yang chik kogu yona mena sambada tene o tene ke shiga ngeba rik tela tangbore tene yiba de karere sana shiga yago yona yang chilaga shiga yago yona yang semje nangla tene da docha shedan timo ngajar chado la sobege kulungte shardeya tere ti karishene sharge yore sta nganang tene mangbo yu shar nyong chare mangbo hagu ko yore shiga dangzina re ena dangzing de ko 가르쳐 그래 망 잔이나 찹치 손이나 가리나 메신데 통하라 빼갈래도 봐 당신 코랑 다 당신데 메통도 때는 다 녀몽 땅네 여샤 셰당 티모 가잘라 따네 디 간에 종아래에서도 당신에 되는 종도 삼바데 주로 당신 수 밥토고도 와 투고도 와 어때래도 되네 다 디니 되게 쳐봐 당보라 당보 냐는 집에 가블라 따처럼 바르지 치셔 디니래 시가 독자통 삼로 담마다 mambo 녀몽 담마다 샤르데 디니데 바르지 치셔래 되네 강삼제네 신에 기념는데 하고 차네 동반이 냠네 싹동데 고 마수 생야라 되네 바르지니 숨바데 고조 용어래 바르지 숨바데 간데레서나 종진이들에 송진이들 종원 유든 zemba sem세 곰 잠나 곰 잠킨 게 로직 샤르네 나 곰 잠킨지도 섬네 zemba 찰라라 타와 지요 되게지도와 오타텔라 되네 간조기 빼차게 중 나라 시지드바세 송아래 녀모버드바케 감성 코로발라 동지 주인 송아래 시시드바네 남친지 고방 롬버지 마투비게 되네 바르지칭의 송도 남친지 공방세야데 동반이 또버지비게 되네 무수 바르지칭의 송진이들의 어다 딜레 시시드바 송아래 다 딜레 차와지 요아래 때 가르르서나 딱 간조 추게 추식 나라 박차그리바 서가래 박차그리바 어따 박차그리바데 당복간데레서나 동반이에 라마게 모르낭 저런게 동반이에 마그번 합라 고메게 냠 고메게 사타 고메 사스는 말에데 곰텔라 송진이 까야 메베게 곰 마저랑바게 신에 융미 신에 세그래 어따 테 마저랑바게 신에 테 냠len 존에 라마게 다 동반이 생에데 셈징고 내lun디레스는 어저 낭산에 되네 전화 마저랑바데 강라 향네 되네 참삼라 동반이데 상상상상선에 되네 윤통통 제라 샤로운데 제라 랑바 제네 마저바 향 되네 바로 제네 디 남도 마샤르게 했네 되네 다기게 소소랑르비 이시 왜사라 당생에 템파 딥만 딥네 코랑 마 딥하다 탁 세지 남도 지금 마샤르 샬라 지금 유아지 요아래 나도 유아 당보세 어따 딜라 때네 박차 그르바스 맹땅네 되네 땅나와래 뒤인도 간속게 챘나봐 빼졌다베 까불라 나양 찍바래 빼졌다베 까라 냐모메 데바시 데바야마타 세네자바 마보자고레데 낭라 강데르 뱅아시 강네데요레데 통고야 말아 다 녀몽 데바다 시시 데바데 처럼 곰자베 까불라 시네지 까불라 녀몽 데바데 통토 그래 샥통지 까불라 시시 데바데 통토 그래 텐데 인상 딥시 송타나 녜게 박차다 시당데 답데버 시에레마도 추게 칙낭라 리딥스 녀딥스 시딥스 박차그데바스 딥시 세야데 다 다랑간소 람 출바 살 세베게 람텔라 시네 삭통이게 람 시네게 람델라 테네 박차 가세 레딥당 녀딥데 살 삭통게 냠렐라 테네 테네 시딥당 박차그데바데 살 텐데시네 때 드바데 ngo시네 ngun진네 다 텐데 렌도가 산에 롤라체 깨툼나 체랑게 담비추 세야다 냠렌 세야데 라메 맹아 생야데 체랑 이치디 딩게 그래 상 예사레 세메 로타 체 그래 다디 빼자자자 다네 사마자자 땅데나 가뜨이나야 로타 체게 말해 카요 말어봐 삼로 땅킨 코랑한테 시집래 딜라 때네 나시송 삼바데 나자레 코 신기면도 삼베 nhập 주셔레 나레 확과지 도서나 차도레 나 빽해봐 인사나네 짐바레 딜레다 디왕던 로데나 딜레 디유야체도 간소 냠는 제가 열어와 텐데 인도 다데 나랑 냠용 거 통네 또 어제 쉬어래 대신에 디비티 ngo시고도 쉬어야 람 출바 살 셰바 출바된 ngo시고도 당보
The path, may the path clarify confusion. We talk about the path clarifying or clearing away our confusion. So how should we understand that? So let's say if we're doing the practice of the 4 times 100,000 accumulations of the preliminaries, or we're doing meditation practice, we actually have to be able to recognize or to identify our delusion. If we want to clear away that delusion, we we have to be able to identify it, right? We have to be able to recognize it. So there's actually 4 types of delusion. And the first one here refers basically to just our character, right? Faults or flaws of character. Some people just have a kind of bad character. They're prone to anger, they're very hypocritical. You tell them to do something, they don't do it. They're always getting in an argument or fighting, very argumentative. Some people are just like that, right? They have that kind of bad character. And even when you like say something to them, you're like, do you even understand what I'm saying? Like, are you even hearing what I'm saying? So that's the first form of delusion. The second one, let's say someone already has kind of a good character, but then they are caught up in things like desire and anger and jealousy, basically the negative emotions. These things come up. I know from my own experience, it's happened to me a lot, right? And so, in fact, the foundation or the ground out of which those negative emotions arise is ego clinging. But ego clinging itself is hard for us to see. So when we look, what we can see is the negative emotions. And so we can see those negative emotions, and then once we see that and experience the negative emotions and see when we experience them, then we can look, where are they coming from? And then that can lead us to the fact of ego clinging. We can see that actually ego clinging is where those negative emotions are actually coming from. So these two, dealing with these 2 forms of delusion is the beginning of our practice. First, dealing with or overcoming this kind of aspects of bad character. And second, the negative emotions, all the different negative emotions that arise. Eventually, when we train in this way, our shamatha becomes pretty good. And then we get to the point where we start with the training in emptiness, the practice of vipassana, training in the practice, the meditation of emptiness. Then we start dealing with a third of these forms of delusion, and that's subject-object grasping, this kind of subject-object duality. So when we're meditating, right, sometimes we have this sense like of the meditator. We have this feeling of me who's doing the meditation, right? It's a subtle kind of mental experience, but I'm meditating. So that kind of subject-object duality, in the texts, when we study philosophy, we call it the cognitive obscuration, right? So we talk about the obscuration, which is the negative emotions, which this is what causes us to take rebirth in the 3 realms of samsara. It's what causes us to fall into the 3 realms of samsara. And then we have this cognitive obscuration, which I just mentioned, and that's actually what stands in the way of omniscience, the state of omniscience. So sometimes we hear about these things in the text, but then when we get into our own practice, actually we see that what's actually directly standing in the way or creating an obstacle for our meditation practice, it's this kind of grasping to subject and object. It's the cognitive obscuration. And again, this is a little bit subtle. And then when we talk about this, even more subtle than this, rather, there's a fourth form of delusion, which is even more subtle than this. And the Dharma word for that, the Dharma kind of term for that, is called the obscuration of habitual tendencies or habit patterns. And what's that? That's like if a teacher points out the nature of emptiness and they talk about this state in which there's non-meditation, right? Which is free from dualistic grasping. It's free from dualism. And there's a state where we're remaining in shamatha, which we can call the shamatha of unfabricated naturalness, remaining in the state of emptiness. And then within this, we can come to the recognition of mind's nature, right? So sometimes we're staying or remaining in that state, and for short moments, this experience, the direct experience of emptiness, does actually arise. For a moment in our mind, we have in our experience, there's this like short moment of the direct experience of emptiness. So we're staying in this state of naturalness, which is totally unfabricated, and then what happens is, just before a thought arises, right? Out of discerning wisdom itself, actually, from within wisdom itself, there's this slight obscuration, this moment of obscuration that happens just before a thought arises, that movement, that first movement of the mind, that is the obscuration of the habitual tendencies. It's that first moment in the mind. And those, when we're studying texts, then we say, oh yes, there's like the obscuration that's called the obscuration of the negative emotions, and then there's something called the cognitive obscuration, and we debate about it. It's like this, it's like that. I've done it too, right? I've studied in this way, just in the way that you guys are studying. But sometimes what happens when we're studying in that kind of way, we read about these things in the text, but we don't actually know how to apply it directly to our personal experience. We don't know what that means in terms of our own experience when we're practicing meditation. So we actually have to go through the process of practicing meditation in order to experience these kind of obscurations directly, personally, in our own practice experience. So when we're doing shamatha practice, right, that's when we actually become capable of seeing our negative emotions. And when we're doing vipassana practice, that's when we come to actually directly see the cognitive obscuration. So these 4 obscurations, we can talk about them also using the Dharma terms. They're called the karmic obscuration, the obscuration of the negative emotions, the cognitive obscuration, and the obscuration of the habitual tendencies. So here when we're talking about the path clarifying confusion, we're talking about the practice of 2 different forms of meditation, shamatha and vipassana. In the context of shamatha practice, in that context, we see the karmic obscuration and we see the obscuration, which is our negative emotions. We can see those 2 in shamatha practice. And then in the context of vipassana practice, that's when we come to see the cognitive obscuration and also the obscuration of habitual tendencies. That's when we can actually directly see those in our meditation. And if we're able to recognize, to identify those obscurations, then we're able to actually apply the Dharma in practice, right? We can practice the Pith instructions, and then we can really feel a sense of confidence. Oh, the Dharma teaching is genuine. It's really true. It's really authentic. It's something that I can practice. These Pith instructions, we have a real sense, we gain an inner sense of confidence in the Dharma teachings, and we actually become sure about the possibility of attaining awakening. And it's different than what we feel when we've just read about it in a text, right? We can't gain that kind of inner confidence through just reading text. We gain that confidence, that real confidence in the possibility of attaining Buddhahood through our own personal meditation practice. And so then and so that's really important actually, because otherwise sometimes when we study, then we get completely caught up in things like, oh, I know, I've learned this, and then we're being really proud, like he doesn't really understand that, and then we're looking down on someone like, oh, somebody else gets it better than me, and then we're jealous, and then we think, oh, I'm so learned, and then that's a form of grasping. And if we just follow on that path, like where are we going? If our practice is to get rid of that kind of emotion, right? And so it's really important that we actually train personally and experience these obscurations directly in order to be able for our Dharma practice or for the path to actually clarify our confusion. So this is my own personal experience. If we want the path to clarify confusion, first we have to actually identify the confusion that needs to be clarified.
Jabje trugo jinu buchege tene jezoke nyamne re somare lam truba serba te jezok nyamne.
Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, Kyabje Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche said that this part of the practice is the practice of the generation stage and perfection stage, right? For the path to clarify confusion, that's a reference to these aspects of practice.
Da truba yishi so char songate dagi shene lagdo ni ge nyamne che 동반 얘들 또서 되네 또만 얘 또 차네 다 냠네데 제들 되네 도그나나 송여래 샤 제백갑소 동니 제습직갑라 유미 삐제다 검스 유미 삐제세테 탐제 되네 랑신지 마투바 멜람타보 유마타보 미규르타보 세네 장주선바께 냠네 난거여래 된나신게 셈나라 남도 가리 남도 코랑 랑신게 되네 직주 니주니 만로 바치체 남도 코랑 샤르마 타도 되네 랑로도 드로네 랑식도 드로네 랑사르도 졸 송아예나 되네 주마도 밀람다고 통한 오늘에 송아래 남도 지금 좀 뜨나 주마 밀람다고 공발에 마도 주마 밀람 출신 통화 말에 송아래 대인도 값서 다다 된데 제네 뒤준도 셈나 남토 서로바 류 초를 셈 최선의 풍부가 나라 장도 삼로지 땅다 풍부가 나라 죽당 셈이가 나라 죽더라 찍마도 매래 시가 정말 셈지 공도로와 서로와 뒤시 뒤지 남시 뒤시가 셈 공도래 근데 얘도 qabla 때는 딱 속에나다 나와 가르샤나양 탐지 랑식도 드론네 랑도 드론네 찡대와 착보 담보 담대와데 매바 파 표시로 대와 되네 양태탱 로대와 대대체 됐음들아 남도 가르샤나양 축심보 매바 니바 누메도 드론네 대대치는 로제 다 당보 남도 샤나 누메 니바 매바체 강점 제는 남도 샤나 코랑 드론네 랑식도 드로소나 되네 트루바 예시소 차를 쏘네 트루바 같이 샤라오나 코랑 랑시 동반이도 드로소나 되네 니룩라 밥되게요래 딱 디기 냠는데 다기 신내 학통 이게 냠는래 때네 학통기 유라 제점라 뉴발라 때네 되네 트루바랑 시도 드로소나 트루바 예시소 차토고요래 쏘네 되네 다 냠는 제네 딜 값들라 때네 제톱 세야티 니디 때네 바르 쳔보디 충으로 그래 가르시는 그래서나 냠바르 샤다 마샤티 심들라라래 그래 심데게 짐바티 슉쳔보 요데베 값라 제톱래 심데게 짐바티 딩딩 요라 멜라 누메도로나 제시에서래 심들라 짐바 따네 메소나 냠샤세바래 다 근데 저는 짐바 따네 메소나달라 냠샤체 되네 파소 그때 쉐베 값라양 심들 짐바 착보라 매나야 충충제 요네 그때 제 대원인배에서 나 대원인선에 다그 냠샤 제시에 로도 또서 니바데 요다나 제시래 되네 미지는 왜 쇼세도다 아 세야 차롱 제는 로네 근데 선바상마 영도다 값값 제토브래 된데 제토브래 된데 냠샤 제시 제토브테 가발았다고 그래서는 천하게 쓰면 되게 짐바매 용용 여봐 짐바 찡소가 디스나 때는 냠샤 지시 찡소가 디스나 때는 냠샤 지시 제도 시그레마도 냠샤서야 돼 인데 데데나 코 냠샤 임바 타 미꿀 믹 먹을나 셈데 찡 되게야 돼 인데 냠샤 인데 대화 지가 냠샤 임베 마찹세레 그래서 냠샤 문에 가르자 셈라 짐바 메나 냠샤 칭이래 소아래 된대전 당 아주 싫어라서라 되네 시베 값소양 시대비 로수진 데서 시에거라마도 되게 말아 된대 시래 나 되는 저주 심송 다 되래 되는 출발 시수 차르셔 되인세
And then the aspect of confusion dawning as wisdom. So if we're practicing shamatha and then gradually we move to practice vipassana and we give rise to some small kind of experience of the realization of emptiness, then it's said in the texts, in the sutras, that our meditative equipoise is like space, and in post-meditation the experience is like the 8 examples of illusion. So where we're not holding on to things as being truly established in the post-meditation, seeing things as being like an illusion, like a dream, like an optical illusion, and so on. And then when, for example, we're walking around and going about our ordinary experience outside of a meditation session, if thoughts arise, and if we don't just follow with one thought after the next, right? If those thoughts then gradually come to the point where as soon as they arise, they just are naturally freed by themselves, in and of themselves. They're naturally liberated, they naturally collapse. Then, in that moment, we really are actually experiencing phenomena as illusory in that moment, right? If when we do have a thought, and then that thought is followed by the next thought and the next thought, and we just get caught up in that ordinary continuity of thought in the post-meditation, even if we are saying to ourselves all of this is like an illusion or a dream, we're like meditating on it but we're not actually seeing it, we're not directly experiencing it as illusory because we're still caught up in that ordinary continuity of thought. And so normally, right, we have like our body, we have our sensations, our mind and phenomena, or let's think of it in the context of the 5 aggregates. The form aggregate, there's just one. The other 4 aggregates all fit basically actually under the category of mind, right? Sensation and perceptions and karmic formations and consciousness. Those 4, we can say those 4 aggregates fit under the category of mind. And then physical aggregates, there's just one, the body. So if our experience of the physical aggregates is just very naturally at ease. It's not so tight, right? We're not so tight, so fixated and tight and bound, but just natural and relaxed and at ease. And our mind also, like, yes, there's thoughts that are present in the mind, but they're not so strong. The power of those thoughts is just kind of dissipates and they become not as powerful. At first, thoughts are powerful. At first, thoughts are really strong and powerful, right? But eventually, they lose that kind of power, and the thoughts, the power of our thinking, the sort of force behind our thoughts naturally fades away. That's when we talk about here this process of delusion dawning as wisdom. And so in that moment, as many delusions as arise, they just naturally become emptiness. They naturally become like that. Each thought that arises naturally brings us into the recognition of the natural state. And then basically we've started with shamatha, we've moved into vipassana, and then we come to the point where the thoughts, even when they arise, they just naturally are liberated by themselves. They naturally fall away by themselves. And so this is what we call this experience of delusion dawning as wisdom, or confusion dawning as wisdom. And so here what happens basically is that gradually, there's the experience of meditative equipoise, and then there's a post-meditative experience, right? Those are 2 separate. The gap between them becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And the reason then is because in our meditative equipoise, we're in a state where we're not actually caught up in any kind of thinking, right? The conceptual mind, thoughts are not active. And then in post-meditation, there is more like strong thinking. The thoughts are more powerful. But then there's this in-between where we're in a state where there are thoughts, but we're not as caught up in them. They're not as strong as in the ordinary post-meditative state. So there are these kind of different circumstances, these 3 kind of different experiences that happen. And so when we have no fixation whatsoever, just like absolutely no fixation at all, that's equipoise. But then let's say we're talking to someone, and yeah, there's like a little bit of thinking happening, right? But it's kind of light, like, hey, how are you? And then there's just like a very bare, like a more bare level of thinking. This is the ensuing experience. And then there's the ordinary post-meditative state where somebody says like, hey, come here, and we jump up and we're immediately like fully involved in this thinking mind and acting and holding on. And so that's something that's different. So there are these 3 kind of different experiences. I
like to say, Nyamshala, experience malab.
Lasso? I shouldn't use the word experience when it comes to meditation, the meditative equipoise. So we can't say there are 3 experiences.
가연스는 인지기 민주 당복하는 experience 망다쳐래요. 냠샤들 experience 랍시나 되네. 지금 요사를 삼대게.
Because Western people or international students are really obsessed with experiences, and so then you start thinking, oh, I need to have some experience in my meditation. So don't think about experience in the context of meditation. There are these three circumstances. So yeah, the meditative equipoise, and then what ensues from that, and then ordinary post-meditative experience.
Nyamsha jeshi jetops.
Jeshi.
Jeshi santa.
Injitoni.
Nyamsha ki nupate manyamba yoba.
Yeah. So there's meditative equipoise, and then there's the ensuing
continuum of residue of equipoise.
There you go. The residue or continuum of equipoise, where that it hasn't totally evaporated. The experience of equipoise hasn't totally evaporated. And then there's the post-meditative state. These three.
Jabje truku ujin rinpochege, truba yishizo chabra chibige tabla, chakcha chimbyuge mengata, zopa chimbyuge menga nyamne chegore soan.
Kyabji Tuku Urgyen Rinpoche said that the method for letting delusion arise as wisdom is the practice of Mahamudra and the practice of the great perfection.
Ta tiring para tupten tene 1000 Buddha temple la tuzu sangji ku shugi dunsu duntu ta ngarang chu japje chujin yama rinpoche ge tiring a shegore song ka nangne ta nge nyonyong che sheba yins.
So today here in Paltubten, Ling, the 1000 Buddha temple, and in the presence of the Buddhas, images of the Buddhas of the past, present, and future, Chugyi Rinpoche said that I needed to give a Dharma teaching, and so I have done that.
Di kande sheba yinsana japje truku ujje rinpoche rigdang jinguru jasu chabda tene sangji ji ku tene nyisu mebe tene tenchen tsawe lama ke tene sung tema meba tene repeating word of the Buddha songya tenangla tene lo chusu drowa cho lamdo drowa lam truba seba truba hishisu shaba tela tene tage japje truku ujje rinpoche song yoba chenamba hago goba re tene indu di chene repeating word of the Buddha chene te ngarang ke samsur dang dane tsawe lama ke sung dang chenlabdi yongre samne tering tene je kotsuwa yins.
Kyabje Tuku Urgyen Rinpoche, the Lord of the ocean of mandala deities, someone who is indivisible from the Buddha himself, my immeasurably kind root guru. I have been teaching in accordance with his own stainless words, repeating the words of the Buddha. He spoke about turning our mind towards the Dharma, letting our Dharma practice become the path, such that the path clarifies confusion and confusion comes to dawn as wisdom. As you all know, this is a teaching that was given by Kyabje Tuku Urgyen Rinpoche, and so I have repeated it here together with some of my own experiences and thoughts. I wanted to share with you the stainless teachings of my root guru because I believe that there is great blessing there.
Kyabje chujin yama rinpoche ke gongshi tang tukje molumla mangbo yosdu te ngazo changma ke koyore te ngazo gindyon ba tsore tene ani tsore tene mija pomo changma ke te rang soso ke tsayo lama ke tukje molum te rubya te ngazo ke chö nyamlen tsobo che dire de yore ti indu te temba maje ba chine ga chambores.
Kyabje Chukyi Rinpoche has expressed some of his thoughts and his aspirations and his wishes. So we heard him express this earlier, and here there are many monks and nuns and lay practitioners gathered together, and to carry out the aspirations of our root guru is what it means to practice the Dharma. And so it's important for us to keep his compassionate aspirations and wishes in mind.
Lama kunye kui ngutup top, songnye songnye ngutup top, tuknye tukik ngutup top, seta nganzo na nyamne chingen zola, lama tuknye na ngutup dini togure se shege yores.
Pleasing the Guru's physical form, we receive the blessings of awakened body. Pleasing the Guru's speech, we receive the blessings of awakened speech. Pleasing the Guru's mind, we receive the blessings of awakened mind. So for us to receive blessings, we should know that this is how it happens. I think of it like this. That's how I think. I'll just leave it here for today.
Chanju semju rinpoche maji kanam jejuru chek jeba nyamba meba kongne kondo pewarai sho lo chuzo drowarai chenje labdo so chu lamdo drowarai chenje labdo lam turba sewarai chenje labdo so turba ishi so chawarai chenje labdo so kunsang dorji changchen menche tenchen zaiwe lama yinche drowe tundo mulam kandava teda tamje tengdre drobarai sho sonam di tamje sekwa topne nyebe tanam pamje Alain Tobai Sibe Sole Doa Tolovarai Sho Temba Jigden Kamsu Jamba Tang Temba Niyu Shindu Sarwa Tenzen Pulom Tumjing Darba Temba Yuring Nebe Trashi Sho
好，我们一起回向。愿以此功德，庄严佛净土，上报四重恩，下济三途苦。 若有见闻者，悉发菩提心，尽此一报身，同生极乐国。大马法师这边听一听啊，一位越南的法师明天就离开，他想跟大马的法师拍张照。 我们30秒内完成，大家现在就往前移步到前面这边就拍。越南法师，赶快去把相机。对对，我先讲完先讲完先，到你回乡，我们大家往前30秒把它拍完。
Nguyện đem công đứng lại hướng về khám tánh cả đệ tử và chúng sanh đều chọn thành Phật đạo. 谢谢。